A quick word from the official sponsors of the podcast across September. Have you been worried about personal safety lately? Help You Find Me is easy to access and easy to use software that allows you to share personal information with people of your choice to put your mind at ease about potential dangers when you are out and about. Help You Find Me is a digital if I go missing file that means that in the event of anything happening to you, those closest to you that have been given your prior permission to access information could hold the final puzzle pieces needed to track your whereabouts and check in on your well-being. To find out more, visit helpyoufind.me today. And for a 20% discount, use the code helpyoufind.me/HYFM Cult today. Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of the Cult Vault. We are continuing our journey through the troubled teen industry with another testimony today. But before we get started, I just wanted to shout out and say a massive thank you to Stephanie, who has signed up for the 1-year subscription of exclusive content through redcircle.com, where I host my podcast. Red Circle are the guys that distribute my show to Apple, Spotify, and all the places you find your podcasts. I'm so thankful for your support, Stephanie, and I hope that you enjoy every episode. Now here is Dustin with his story about a program known as A Better Way Ministries. Hello, Dustin, and welcome to the show. Thank you for getting in touch and agreeing to come and share your story with the listeners today. We're going to be talking a bit more about the troubled teen industry, and you've come to talk about a specific program that you were involved with a few years back. So would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Hi, my name is Dustin, and I was involved with A Better Way Ministries for around 2.5 to 3 years.
A Better Way Ministries. And do you have any idea of where this program started, how it originated?
If I remember correctly, it originally started in 2006 on the founder's property. The founder is John Barrow. It started on his property in Sharpsburg, Georgia. And it was basically a work-based program where people would live on his property and do labor-based work for him, such as taking care of the yards, the lawns, grass cutting, brush cutting, things along those lines.
Okay, and was it advertised to potential clients as a work-based program?
Yes, it was. It was advertised strictly as that. That's what he had set it out to be.
Okay.
And I had known about it since it started because my family they went to the church that he was involved with. They were parishioners there. So they knew him on a personal level, just like I did.
Okay. I was going to ask about the religious element, because A Better Way Ministries has sort of those Christian connotations to it. So was there a Christian element to the work that was being done?
Yes, there actually was. He would constantly speak about, that what we were doing was for the Lord. It was for the better good. It doesn't matter what you were doing. If you were cutting grass, you were taking care of brush, things along those nature. He would always say that what you were doing was for the Lord, and it was very Christian-like. You were basically helping out another brother, as it were, in their lives and helping them get their stuff together while you got your stuff together.
Okay. So people are going to attend these programs to work on something that they're struggling with in their lives at that time?
Yes. It started out based as a program that was strictly, for people that had drug issues and alcohol issues. And then eventually they changed that term to be life controlling issues. He wanted to basically widen out the net as far as that was concerned with people that would join, so they wouldn't just think it was for people that had drug addictions or alcohol issues. I mean, it could be anything from sexual issues, even, if you were gay, if you were openly gay, you would come into the program, and then after, I think, a few months, they would send you to a program up in Kentucky that they have some connections to, called Pure Life Ministries, which is one of those conversion therapy programs.
Right. Oh, okay. So definitely some Christian affiliation and strong kind of use of scripture coming through within the programs themselves. And this leader, you said his name's John Barrow?
Yes.
Does he have any professional accreditation that allows him to open up a place like this on his own property?
Not that I am aware of. I know that there are certain laws where you actually don't have to be accredited or insured if you're going to open what's called a sober living facility. And I think that's what this would fall under, even though it's a ministry. So he does have accreditation as far as ministry work is concerned. Like, he is a certified pastor and all that. So he has that accreditation. But I think the way he gets around it is by calling it a ministry. So he doesn't have to jump through all the hoops to open up an actual rehab, because that would require so much more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's interesting as well, because I know that a lot of church groups will be given a tax exempt status. So I wonder if his business would have been given that exemption because it was classed as a ministry.
Yes, it definitely was. It was given tax exempt status. The way that they received the funding for the facilities were, they would tell you when you were signing up, when you were about ready to come in, that you could come in, no money down, just work for them for 18 months.
Okay.
Because it's an 18-month program, or your family members or someone else could donate what they called a tithe.
Yeah.
Which is a well-known phrase in the Christian community. And you would tithe around $1,500 a month or more. And that was said to be placing into this program, when in reality, the money really wasn't going there.
Right. Okay. Do you know where the money was actually going?
Well, from my understanding, when it started up on his property, he had literally one house to hold approximately 20 to 30 people.
Right. Okay. So when people were going to attend this program, they were living on his property at the same time.
Yes, they were. And then eventually he had purchased a piece of property out in Sonoya, Georgia.
Okay.
Which he then made the main campus for the program. And it started out with around 3 homes. And then over time, as more money came in, he expanded out the property to hold the first 3 homes, and then 4 or 5 duplex buildings, which were dubbed the apartments. And then he put a new house up, or it was a house that was already up there. And then he had placed a new home onto the property, which was one of the homes the students lived in. And then over time, as the money kept flowing in, he kept expanding the property out to the point of purchasing vehicles, building a big student center, which is now their main church chapel on property, where they do church services on Saturday evenings.
Mm-hmm.
And the money, I've looked it up before, they pull in around $1 million to $2 million a year.
Wow. Okay.
And that's just apparently through charitable donations, because the program's very well connected within basically the entire state of Georgia. They have connections to Pinewood Studios, which I don't know if you're very familiar with them, but they're involved with Marvel Studios.
Right. Okay.
And that's where a bunch of the Marvel films have been filmed at. They're also connected to Chick-fil-A,
Okay.
which is a major company. I'm sure you've heard of them. I've met the owner of Chick-fil-A. Very nice man, but the money that's coming in there, he would make statements saying this is going to the ministry, and all I saw it was doing was building these homes
Right.
and going to purchase food. And to say the least, the food was about possibly a 600 calorie deficit a day for each
Wow.
student.
Okay. Okay.
So as far as the money's concerned, I mean, I've heard stories and seen money just get taken out of safes by people, and the money, it doesn't all add up to me to where the funds were going. I think
Right.
most of
Yeah.
it was, I don't want to make assumptions, but I think there's a lot of shadiness as far as the funding and money is concerned.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that the money was kind of the tithe that is donated to go back into the church, but seems to be using to expand the amount of property that A Better Way Ministries has overall, then increases the capacity for residents to come and join this program and then bring in more money into the overall program. So it's kind of more like a business expansion than a one program on one piece of land, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that point, because the problem with that place is that there were people that were sent there that were most likely, there were some people there that were court mandated.
Right.
So if they did something wrong in the program's eyes, and the people that were running it at the time, they would extend out your time at the program.
Mm-hmm.
And if you refused and you wanted to leave, they would contact the court systems and all that. Because with the way that programs run, is the longer you're there, the more money you make from them.
Mm-hmm.
And the more money that you can bring in as a person for that program, then you're worth so much more to them.
Okay. And do you know of any examples of how they would extend a person's time within the program?
I've seen it firsthand. I've seen plenty of people that I knew in there that were my friends at the time who would get in trouble for anything from smoking a cigarette to testing positive on a drug test. They would be told, okay, well, you're not going to graduate in 2 months. You're going to have to wait another 4 or 5 months.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or I've seen,
if somebody's court mandated to attend one of these programs, how is their position then filled? Is it down to the families to foot the bill for that person to stay within this program?
It's suggested to the family that they make payments, but it's not 100% a requirement for that program. They don't force you to do it, but it is highly, highly suggested that you do make payments.
Okay. And if you don't make payments, you're still putting the manual labor into your time in the program to help with the upkeep of the property overall.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, do you know how many staff were working roughly before the program expanded over such a big radius so quickly as well, because it's not even been around for 20 years yet. 2006 seems like so recently for one of these programs to open and to expand so quickly. And I'm wondering if you know roughly how many staff would have been working on that original first property that was John Barrow's home.
As far as I know, there was the intake coordinator, and there was John himself, and I think there might have been a few more staff members, but it was very limited.
Okay.
Because the main deal with their staff members is they like to promote basically from within. They don't hire outside of the program. If you go through the program and you want to stick around, they'll most likely offer you a position on staff.
Right. Okay. And so that leads me to assume that perhaps the staff themselves weren't accredited in rehabilitation either.
No, nobody was. As far as rehabilitation was concerned, you were basically told the Bible is your rehabilitation. You have to read that. You don't get to experience, like the 12-step program. That wasn't even spoken about there. That was basically outlawed. You didn't speak to a psychiatrist. You didn't do any AA meetings or NA meetings. Your only rehabilitation was working manual labor and reading your Bible.
Okay. That sounds very, very similar to the program Teen Challenge. And I wonder if there's any inspiration being drawn from that program by John Barrow.
There is, because John Barrow actually attended Teen Challenge.
He did. Oh, do you know, these programs within the troubled teen industry, they all overlap in one way or another, and they all, you can find the origin point of every single one of them, and it's almost incestuous how closely linked they are with one another. I've just interviewed a former member of an enthusiastic sobriety program, and even that sounds similar to this. It's really strange how similar they all are to each other, really. And so you're talking like a very small number of staff to 20 or 30. I don't know, what do you think the people would have been classed as? Clients or residents or members or participants?
They are classed as students.
Students, okay. So how many, you mentioned 20 or 30 in that initial building on John Barrow's property to a handful of staff members?
Yeah, it was about that when they first started. Now, I know when I left the program, there was about 96 students to about 4 or 5 staff members.
Right. And you attended this program 10 years after it opened in 2016, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And can you share with us your story of how you became involved in A Better Way Ministries initially?
I had known about it at one point or another. When I was in my early to mid-20s, my parents wanted to send me there because I had gotten out of control with my drug use and my attitude, and they didn't know what to do. So they tried to send me in there originally when it was at his property when it began. And we went down there, went to go meet the intake director. He explained everything to me. I explained to him, if I do come in, I'd like to say bye to my friends before I come in.
Yeah.
Because when you go in, you can't speak to anybody that is not immediate family.
Right.
And that is very much, watched over as far as that's concerned. And I was told, well, you don't need to say bye to your friends. They don't care about you. And so we left that day after we were told back then that, it wasn't even a request about the money. Back then, it was told straight to my family that they would have to pay a certain amount each month.
Okay.
Meanwhile, they had been told by John Barrow that there was no funds that had to be given. And that was just because at the time, the intake director, he, to say the least, he's a nice individual, but he's a hustler.
Right.
Like, he will do whatever it takes to get that money from your pocket.
Yeah.
And the next day, he called up my house, and my mom had answered, and he told my mom that he had spoken to my probation officer, and if I didn't enter the program, I would be going to jail.
Okay.
My mom had to explain to him at the time he doesn't have a probation officer.
Okay.
To which the intake director stood by his statement and said, "Oh, yes, he does. I talked to his probation officer." My mom said, "No, he doesn't," and then hung up the phone.
Right. Okay.
And,
so your mum's got her wits about her then.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
She did at the time. So we stopped discussing it. I started to clean up a little bit. And then a few years later, my parents, both of them have passed on at this point. I had lost a very dear friend of mine, a couple of dear friends, and I started to go off the rails real bad with alcohol. And I had to get my life back on track. And I had moved out of state. And then once I moved back, I had nowhere to go. I was homeless. So I was picked up by a family member. They took me to the program and dropped me off because I had nowhere to go. And I just decided, okay, I need somewhere to go to. I'm going to go here where I know half the people that work here because they're family friends. So I trust them. I'll see what this is about. And the rest was history, basically. I stayed there for about 6 months, and then I decided I wanted to leave, and I told them I wanted to leave, so they dropped me off at the infamous Waffle House, which is where they used to drop students off at that wanted to leave. And later on that evening, I kept calling, and I had finally gotten a hold of the program director, who was in the middle of a chapel service. He had placed me on speakerphone during the chapel service and practically made me beg to come back.
Wow. Okay. So potentially using you as an example to other people in the service on why you shouldn't leave in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And the worst part about that was it was very humiliating.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like degradation to the point of, telling someone, "Oh, no, repeat that again." And I would have to constantly repeat, "I messed up. I want to come back." And it was, as soon as I got there, they turned it into the Lord sent him back home.
Right. Okay.
It was very, that's when I started to feel something was off there.
Yeah. And it seems like almost like a deterrent for you to do it again, if that's the sort of experience that you're going to have, the humiliation and everything that came with that experience. It would almost make you second guess trying to leave the program a second time. Do you think that that's maybe why the situation was handled that way, or is there another reason?
I believe that was probably the way that had to be the reason behind it, because if you think about it like this, you're taking people that have been forced into this program by family members and told, if you don't get your stuff together, you can't come back home. Mm-hmm. So if they end up leaving or getting kicked out, they're scared to death of the aftermath. Like, most people were scared they'd probably never see their children again, or their family would disown them and they'd wind up on the streets.
Yeah.
So it was a very good deterrent. And funnily enough, the next day after I had came back the night before, they had made a new rule stating that if somebody had left, they would have to wait approximately the amount of time they had already been there before they could return.
Right. So, okay, wait. Let me just get my head around this. So you were in the program for 6 months before you decided to get dropped off at this Waffle House. So if you were to leave and then realize that maybe you needed a bit more help or a few more contacts before you could find somewhere to stay and get yourself on your feet, they would make you wait another 6 months before you could return.
Exactly.
And you'd arrived at this place with basically no friends and family because you'd had a few tragic incidences in your life that led you to be kind of alone and without any resources to provide for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the worst part.
Okay, so then I guess their argument would be, well, you don't have any of those things and we've given you those things and now you're going to turn around and leave. But there must have been good reason for you to leave the program in the first place if they were giving you a place to sleep and feeding you, even though the meals, as you described, sounded meager, they were providing for you. So what happened in those 6 months for you to decide that actually you can't stay there anymore?
Within those 6 months, what they have there is called visitation days, where your family can come visit you.
Yeah.
Or you can speak with your family on the weekends on 10-minute phone calls. But the phone calls, of course, you're watched over while you make these phone calls because they want to make sure you're not speaking ill of the program or anything along those lines.
Okay.
I had a family member who came and visited me, and after they had visited me, I was given a drug test because they believed that family member had passed me drugs, because the very next day I had come down with an illness that was going around the property. And of course I passed the drug test, thankfully. So I got to prove them wrong. I actually told the staff member that had tested me, I told you I wasn't on no damn drugs.
Yeah.
I told you I'd pass. And they had told me that family member could no longer come visit. And the reason for that was because they felt that family member was dangerous for me and toxic and could lead me down another path of ruin, as it were. So I was pretty upset at the program because they were listening to another family member who I have nothing to do with because of my mother's death. And that person was feeding them false information, stating that I was using drugs with this family member when I was not, because I hadn't seen this family member in a couple of years.
Right. Okay. So they are taking this false information that this estranged family member is feeding them and basically making your time within this program a lot more difficult.
Yes, and they were doing that because that family member that was feeding the information was a staff member at the church that the program was affiliated loosely with at the time.
Right. Okay. And what was the average day and week there like for somebody that is attending the program? What did the timetable look like?
At 4:45 a.m., you would wake up, you would put on your shoes, and then you would head downstairs for an hour of praise and worship, which you were mandated to take part in. If you didn't, you would get pulled to the side and probably get written up for it. And then on certain days, depending on the weather, you would take part in some PT time, which was usually just walking up and down the property or doing exercises like jumping jacks, push-ups, sit-ups for about 30 minutes. And then you would go back inside the house. You would head upstairs, make up your bed. You would then do your hygiene, like brush your teeth, fix your hair. And you would head downstairs. You would eat breakfast. And after you were done with breakfast, you would go upstairs to get changed out for either work or class. And they would basically switch you out every other day. You would either do class in the morning to around after lunch, and lunch was always at noon. and then at around 1 you would do work, or you would do work till after lunch, and then you would switch over to class. And
Right.
then you would do that from approximately 1 p.m. till around 5:30 or so. Then you would head over to eat your dinner. Then after dinner, you would take part in a chapel service. And then after chapel service, you would go back to the houses, take your showers, and go to bed.
So pretty busy days then.
Mm-hmm. Very busy.
Yeah, it sounds like you didn't really get any chance to breathe. I mean, I suppose in one sense that at least there's no chance for anybody to sneak off and find themselves some alcohol or whatever the people think that you're doing when your family members come to visit you.
Well, on the weekends, you were given some free time.
Okay.
Which was Saturdays and Sundays you were given free time. And that was unless you were in the workhouse, which was working off property. But Saturdays was basically your free day. You basically got to chill out. You could watch TV or a movie, but the TV had to be a certain rating, and only certain channels were allowed in certain shows. It was basically a lot of History Channel while we were there, and
Right.
a lot of kids movies or Christian films were shown. And on Sundays on Saturday nights you would have chapel service, and on Sundays you would go to church, and it was always 2 church services every Sunday. You did 2 church services, you'd come home, you'd get changed, and then everybody would have to wash the vans, the program vans that would transfer everybody. So you would do that, and then you'd be able to eat, relax, and for a little bit, and then you'd have to do deep clean and everybody in each house would have a chore to do, whether it was taking care of all the baseboards, scrubbing down the walls, scrubbing down your bedroom. Everything had to be cleaned to a certain degree.
Right.
And if it wasn't, you'd have to do it again. And it was very boot camp style military cleaning, like white glove technique type stuff. It was.
Well, I mean, what would happen if you weren't able to reach that level of cleanliness in whatever you were working on?
You'd have to keep doing it till it was up to their standards.
And there'd be somebody to come around and check that's the case.
Yeah, people would actually come by and check with a dry rag or their fingers. They would run it across the baseboards or ceiling fans, and if they saw dust, you'd have to do it again until it was clean.
And these are some examples of the type of manual or physical labor that was expected of you when you weren't doing sort of church-related activities.
I wouldn't really call that labor. The manual labor that was done on property was, again, it revolved around cutting grass, weed eating, pressure washing. It even got to the point to where he had us laying down sod, throwing down seed, planting bushes, plants, digging holes, just ridiculous things they could find you to do because they didn't want you to just be standing around doing nothing. So it doesn't matter if you were told, hey, go dig this hole, put all this gravel in it. You would do that, and then you'd get told the next day, hey, go dig all that gravel out of the hole and fill the hole back in with dirt. They would have to find stuff for you to do on property until you reach the workhouse phase.
And what's the workhouse phase?
Workhouse phase is where you worked for the moving company that he owns, or for any of the other companies that they were connected to. There were people that worked out at Pinewood Studios doing landscaping. There was people that worked out at Chick-fil-A doing landscaping, or you worked on the moving truck or in the warehouse where he had a where he had a furniture shop where you would help make tables and chairs for Chick-fil-A and customers, or you'd work in their thrift store that was connected up as well.
Okay, so there's kind of no chance of anybody running out of work to do.
No, definitely not. He made sure with all the contracts that he got.
It's interesting as well. Did you have a religious affiliation while you were growing up?
I did. We started going to the church that they were connected to back in, say, around 1999, 2000.
Right.
At the time, it was known as Atlanta City Church, but it had changed over the years after the original senior pastor and his family sort of left out of the church. And I was, when I was 15, I was like one of those diehard, Christian youth group kids, just so, happy and go lucky and wanted to like spread the faith. But I'd probably say after my parents passed away and I lost a couple of my friends, my faith basically faded away to nothing. And then when I got back and when I went into the program, it was beaten into your head that you had to follow God. It was basically you were, given some Kool-Aid and you drank it. And I saw people come in there, including myself at the time, wanted nothing to do with God. And why they were in that program, they were all about it. They were born again.
Right. And that's sort of the program's mission statement almost is to help the students achieve that almost.
It definitely is. But in that same extent, I think after a bunch of, after I've seen, spoken with friends and people that have also left there, it seemed like religion sort of dropped away from their lives because of how much it was force fed.
Yeah.
To us and them. It was beyond the point of it being about the message and being a good Christian. It was basically force fed to you that, you had to be fully submissive to that place and that program and the staff members. And it started to spin out for me because every year he would take a certain amount of students down to Florida to his beach house and he would baptize them in the ocean.
Wow, okay.
And this is on a public beach. So if you think about it, he was doing it in front of all these people that have probably never seen this before, that are probably just down there trying to enjoy their vacation.
Right, yeah.
And they're seeing this man walk out into the ocean with 12 students, which I've always found funny and always made jokes about. Jesus had 12 disciples. He always took 12 students down. So there was always a connection to the Bible with him where, he would take 12 students down, basically his 12 apostles, and baptize them in the ocean. Like so Jesus baptized people in the ocean.
Do you think that he has like a God complex?
Oh, yes. Like 100%. That man has his face on the side of the moving trucks with angel wings next to it. That's man has the biggest God complex I have ever seen in any individual. And it's quite scary because people will rely on him to the point to where, they will ask him, hey, Brother John, I want to marry this woman. She's very sweet. What do you think? And he'll give them advice and people will follow it. I have seen people completely break off friendships with family members and friends. I've seen people break off relationships. He would tell them it's not good for them. Like, people look at him when they're in that program like he is God. Right. Because to them, he is. This man spent, I don't know how much money on a statue, a copper statue of Jesus. And it's a replica of a statue that's over in Israel. I don't remember the name of the statue, but it's an exact replica of it.
I honestly thought that you were going to say a copper statue of himself.
Well, that's the joke. Everybody always said, "Oh no, that's Brother John right there on that statue. That's not Jesus." Everybody always makes that joke, but it could be true with him knowing how he is.
I've just had a quick Google of this man, and he's got a few books on Amazon as well.
He does. His book. You had to read that book while you were there.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
He made you read it because the thing was, you should give it a read sometime. It's actually quite interesting. But the stories in that book that he tells, where he talks about his life and going to Teen Challenge, he actually knew the founder of Teen Challenge.
Right.
Like personally, on a personal level, he knew him. They were friends. So that's how he got the inspiration to start Better Way, was from going to Teen Challenge. Because I don't know if you know much about the founder of Teen Challenge. He wrote a book called Across in the Switchblade, which we also were forced to read. But I digress. He knew him personally to the point to where he would tell us stories about him, about how he used to take people to New York to meet him, and how he was such a great man, and how he gave him his blessing to start this place. And it was just the God complex with him I have seen in various other facilities that I have personally gone to and or worked for. But his program specifically makes him out to be your salvation, even though he says your salvation is Jesus. In reality, it's him, because he's giving you a place to stay.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's difficult to kind of wrap your head around this one, I think, because in one sense, on the surface, this place is providing, shelter and resources for people that might not have access to them otherwise. There's no official need on paper to provide money to stay here, to receive kind of housing and a place to sleep and kind of food in your belly. But then on the flip side, you're expected to attend a very strict regime of church-related activities, as well as contribute to extensive manual and physical labor. So it's kind of to pay your keep almost. So it's difficult to, it would be difficult on the surface, anybody kind of visiting the website or anybody just reading like a short news article about this place, to realize that there are potential red flags and maybe sort of coercive tactics of control being placed on the students within the programs. Do you see kind of what I mean from an outsider's perspective?
Yeah, I can definitely see that. The thing with this program is, as far as outsiders are concerned, we would go to churches that have never seen us before. We would be involved with charitable programs, such as there was one program that was held when I was there, where we were sent to a convention center in the city of Atlanta to pack up lunches for children that were affected by a hurricane. And we had maybe 2 to 3 van loads of people that would go down there, and we would just stand there all day and pack lunches and help spread the word about what the place did. And people would start, they would only see the positive, the outsiders were. They would only see the positive things that John Barrow wanted them to see. He never wants anything negative to get out about that place, because if it does, it'll affect what he does there. It'll affect everything, because as far as the city of Sonoya and all of his other connections are concerned, what he's doing is very positive. There's no negativity involved. There's nothing that is cult-like in any manners there. And he enforces the narrative that they are doing God's work.
Mm-hmm.
They're not hurting anybody mentally, physically, emotionally. They're doing the Lord's work by helping these people. And it's sad, because what happens there behind the scenes with the people that are emotionally and mentally abused, it's tragic, because you see people that come in there that just want to get their life together, like I did, and they don't care if you break down crying, or you deal with a tragedy with a family member on the outside of the program. Your focus needs to be on what you're doing there instead of what's going on elsewhere. And it's very painful. I mean, me personally, I still have nightmares about that place. I have PTSD because of that place. And I know a lot of other people that still, are the same way. They don't like to discuss it or talk about it because it messed them up so bad internally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And nobody sees that.
And there's a few things that you've mentioned there that I want to discuss a bit further, but I wanted to circle back quickly to Chick-fil-A. Do you think that they have religious affiliations? Obviously they do with A Better Way Ministries, because they are linked to them from what you've said. But is it sort of owned by somebody that's spiritual or religious themselves? Is it just a few particular branches of Chick-fil-A that are linked to Christian work, or do you know any more about that situation?
I know that Dan Cathy is a very religious individual.
Right.
He's probably one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. So, as far as I know, he is a very religious individual, and his company carries that policy. They are a Christian-owned company. There's various companies that are like that. As far as I know, with him, his Christianity carries on to his company. We saw that, what was it, a couple of years ago with the issues about not donating to, activist groups for gay rights and LGBTQ rights. But they are a Christian-owned company. I know that much. As far as his personal standings, I don't know a lot of that, because I haven't spoken with him that much about it. But from what I do know about him, he is probably one of the most genuine individuals there is. But I do know that him being involved with A Better Way is most likely due to similar belief systems.
Okay. So there seems to be, in my mind here, from an outsider's perspective, there seems to almost be two worlds working here, and that is kind of that one side is the Christian church related side of A Better Way Ministries. The other side is almost the business structure that seems to be in place here, with the expansion of the program, and opening up other places, the thrift store, the woodworking company, all these things that John Barrow is working on opening up with the money that's being brought into A Better Way Ministries. And they are crossing over with the students that are part of this program. How long is the program expected to last for the average student?
It's expected to last, you're supposed to be there for 18 months.
Okay.
Their completion rate, when I was there, I was told it was around 8 or 9%.
Right. And and A Better Way, which is actually the name of the John Barrow book that you can find on Amazon. It's I didn't realize this before, but he's actually a former inmate of the county jail.
Yes, he is.
And that sort of leads me to assume that that's why he originally started the program, and then it developed into something a bit more in line with a high demand religious group.
As far as I know, when he started the program, it was faith based, but it was a work based program first off.
Right.
He started the program because he said that he wanted to help people out, just like he was helped when he went to Teen Challenge, and he went through that. But it was started out as faith based, but it wasn't to the it wasn't really to the extreme that it is now.
Right.
It just wasn't. It was more work based, in my opinion, than faith based back then.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned that there was an affiliation with the Atlanta City Church.
Yes, Atlanta City Church was the church that they were affiliated with at the time. I think they are no longer affiliated with them anymore,
okay.
But they still do attend because I believe John does some pastoral work there occasionally on Sundays, and does run some services there. But they used to do the graduation ceremonies there and everything along those lines, and that was the main church you went to on Sundays when the program was based on his property, his personal property. That was where you went to.
And do you know if there was any affiliation with any other programs other than Teen Challenge? Did any of the staff work at any other troubled teen programs that you would know of specifically?
I know for a while there, it was for maybe about a year or so, he had connections with a program called Pathway, which is a program for it's a female program, and it's just based out of one house. I don't know if it's still active to this day, but they did have a major connection with that program, and they stopped that after some issues popped up with some of the male students, and the female residents from that program started occurring. But they had a major connection with that to where he helped get that program up and running with someone at the point from the church. And after a while, they just cut off all ties with that. I don't know if they have any connections still to Teen Challenge. They might, but there's also connections with prison ministries and things along that nature. I know they have connections to Pure Life Ministries, which, as I spoke about, is up in Kentucky. It is a conversion therapy program, also faith-based, but they will send people up there if they believe they need to go there. So they do have some connections with that place as well, because people will come down to pick them up, to take them up there.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So if there's affiliations with Pathway, which is women-based, I'm going to go ahead and guess that A Better Way Ministries is solely for men?
Solely for men.
Okay. That is interesting. And the reason I asked about affiliations with other programs is because Atlanta City Church, there is another program, an enthusiastic sobriety program, that does fall into the troubled teen industry and is sort of a drug and alcohol and substance rehabilitation program itself. It's called Atlanta Insight. So I was just kind of drawing parallels there potentially between more people that might know each other across these programs, which is inevitable because that seems to always be the case with these programs within the troubled teen industry, that hopefully there will be some legal reform around it at some point, especially if people such as yourself continue to come forward and share these stories, which is why it's so important that we're talking today. And you mentioned that you kind of left and you were taken to this infamous Waffle House 6 months into the program, which is a fair few months away from 18 months where you would be expected or potentially expected to complete the program. So can you highlight any other events that led up to you deciding to make that decision on that day?
For me personally, it was just that I was tired of going through the day-to-day dredge of it all, just waking up at 4:45 and doing everything they asked, and then, wanting to relax at the end of the day, just sit down and, watch something on TV, like watch a basketball game or something along those lines, and not having the option to do that, or not being able to really speak to my friends that I had outside of the program, or see my friends, or, see my family when I wanted to, or go home and, spend time with my dogs, or just lay in my own bed. It was just a lack of privacy there was very much an issue for me, which I think also led to me wanting to just back away from that place, because it felt like I wasn't my own person at that point.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that are coming into play here that I think would have that effect on anybody. You've got the 4:45 wake up. You've got the lack of nutritional value in the meals that you're being offered. You've got the control over things that would be classed as leisure time, like watching the TV and choosing what you want to watch on the TV or what music you want to listen to. And then you've got the kind of visitation on weekends, which is being restricted for you personally at this point, where you're being told certain family members aren't allowed to come and see you anymore. And even when you don't have those visitations and you decide to make those phone calls, they're only allowed to last 10 minutes and they're monitored. So there's a lot of stuff going on at this point that I think would kind of have that almost claustrophobic feel for anybody. And then you mentioned that there's a lack of privacy because there's so many other people around. So what are the sleeping arrangements like? Do they add to that feeling of claustrophobia and lack of privacy?
They definitely do. You would be placed into a room, bedroom, very large bedroom. The bedrooms in these homes, because they were homes, very, very nice 2-story homes. The bedrooms there could range anywhere from 2 bunk beds per room to about 4 bunk beds per room. And you would just be stuck in this room. You would have one set of dresser drawers to share with your roommates and one closet. And it got to the point, unless you were in the bigger room, which was nicknamed the football room, which had multiple, dressers set up for people, you didn't really have your own space because you were limited to the amount of clothing you could have, and the showers that were set up there were ridiculous. It was a giant U-shaped bathroom where, there were 2 toilets, one on the outside, one on the inside. There was 4 or 5 sinks set up in there, along with 5 showers. And that was for the entire upstairs. That was where you showered at. If you were lucky enough to get the bathroom downstairs, you would basically be given your own personal bathroom that was attached, but you had to share that with about 6 other people at the time. So it was difficult to take showers, because, you would be told, all right, take a shower, 5-minute shower. And then eventually there was talks about making the shower curtains see-through. basically,
Right.
so they can make sure nothing immoral was going on in there, or as they called it, sinful, or giving into the flesh, because there was a bunch of issues like that that would pop up. I mean, it's a program full of men. You know, you're stuck there for 18 months, something's going to happen.
Yep.
But it was, there was no privacy there. Practically no privacy. It was so ridiculous, and you have to go to sleep in these rooms with all these other people, and people would sleep with earplugs in so they'd be able to actually get some sleep, because all these people are snoring. You're not going to get much sleep, and you got to be up at 4:45. It was just ridiculous, and it was just, there was no privacy there. There's practically none. You have no privacy within that program.
And there's so much here to unpack in what you've just said. So I'm making notes as we go, and I'm going to kind of circle back to a few things. But what are the roles of the staff within the program? Are they there to kind of just oversee the work that you're doing when you're doing the work-based stuff? Are they there to lead the sermons that you are attending? Are they there to kind of cook the meals? Are the meals cooked by other students in the program? And what is the role of the staff member within the program?
Well, first off, the meals are prepared by other students. Whether it was the food that was brought in on the giant Cisco truck, or whether it was, on occasional holidays, they would grill out hot dogs and hamburgers, or, we'd get a turkey on Thanksgiving and some ham, or sometimes, on bigger holidays, family members would bring in all this food so everybody could eat, a decent sized meal. Besides the food situation with how it was prepared, the staff members there, you had the program director, who was basically, he was the overseer of the property, because John Barrow was never really at the property that often. He was only there on Wednesdays for staff meetings, and he would stop by occasionally for chapel services. And the program director, he basically made the major decisions, like, okay, so this person's having issues. I think we need to send them on their way. And he would call all the other staff members in, and those staff members were the head of education, their main teacher, the right-hand man of the program director, the assistant program director, and the campus shepherd, who basically took care of, some discipline issues and things along those natures. And they would all vote on certain things, like who could stay and who had to go, and the campus shepherd at the time was running the discipline forms. So once you were written up, you were given discipline, whether it was writing sentences or digging a grave. You were given a form back that told you what your discipline was. So the campus shepherd would hand these out to everybody. And he was also the main go-to if students had issues with the house shepherds or the house leaders. Now, the house shepherds and house leaders were not staff members. They were actual students. They were the ones that oversaw giving out write-ups to students. Like if you did something wrong, your house shepherd would give a write-up to a house leader, and the house leader would bring it to you. These people were students writing up other students for things they did wrong. Yet, the house shepherds and house leaders, they were also doing some things that were wrong, without people seeing. But they were the main line of defense against the students breaking any rules.
Right.
It was very weird to see people that were still in the program going through it being the ones handing out write-ups.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost then like the self-policing comes in, isn't it? If those are the same people that you're kind of sharing all that space with, the bedrooms and the bathrooms and the showers and all that stuff, you're constantly then going to be watching what you're doing, watching what other people are doing, wondering if you see someone doing something they shouldn't, and then you witness it, and then you don't tell anybody. Are you going to receive any kind of repercussions for not mentioning that to anybody?
Mhm.
So then you're self-policing, not only yourself and making sure that you're behaving in the way that is kind of expected of you in this place, but then you're also watching other people to see if they're keeping in line. And then it's a whole other thing, if the people in positions of power can get these students to look to watch out for each other, then the people in positions of power, they don't have to do any of the work, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And the funny part was, what was it? Maybe about 4 or 5 months before I was about to go into the transition house, which was the house where you were placed when you were about to graduate. I was actually given a role as a house leader. And I had seen people that had become house leaders or house shepherds there. They would take that power that they were given and would basically abuse it. They would turn out from that very nice friend you had to an individual that just couldn't stand like any of the other students. They would basically see themselves as better than everybody else. So when I was given the house leader role, uh, I was at the time I was drinking the Kool-Aid, as it were. So I was ecstatic about the opportunity. And there were times I was a house leader there where I wouldn't write up people
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
I had been in their shoes. I had suffered, discipline and punishment. So I, would see somebody, oh, well, such and such, their bedroom isn't clean, or their dresser drawers that they have their clothes in, it's not organized properly, or they have one too many shoes, write them up. I wouldn't write them up. I just wouldn't. I actually tore up a student's write up and, you know, got rid of the write up. And then it was found out I destroyed the write up and I got in trouble for that. And I felt bad for that student because they were told if they got wrote up again, they would be kicked out. I didn't want to be the one responsible for them going out the door because when I was a house leader, I felt and still do feel responsible for many people that were kicked out of that program. There was one case in particular. This guy came in, he had came up from Miami. Nobody really knew his backstory, and he couldn't get with the program or follow the rules, which I understood because at the time, I was ready to get out of there. I was ready to graduate and move on with my life. And but he came in there and he was constantly arguing with house leaders and shepherds and staff members and yelling at us because we were also people going through the program, but we were punishing him and how that wasn't right. And I saw him literally as he was getting kicked out, crying on the phone, begging John Barrow to let him stay because if he didn't,
Oh,
he was afraid he would die.
oh my
And
goodness.
that day when that happened, I broke down and I sent out a mass text message to staff saying, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I that guy is probably going to wind up dead because of me. And they just came back and said, no, man, you're doing the right thing. Don't let his screw ups get to you. He messed up. It's on him, not on you if something happens. And everybody beat that into my head that I did the right thing, that he screwed up and it
Mm,
wouldn't be my fault. But I'm like, I wrote him up. I'm
yeah.
the one responsible for it, man. because I tried talking to him, and he was a nice guy. He couldn't stand being told what to do, and I
Yeah.
get that.
And what do you feel like if you hadn't have written this person up and somebody found out that he should have been written up and it was your responsibility to do that, that you would have received some sort of backlash for that?
Definitely, probably would have been taken out of the house leadership role, and probably would have been told I had to wait a couple of more months for graduation.
Right.
Um, because this is sort of an offshoot, but near the end of most people's time in that program, the actual staff, because I saw this when I had become staff, would turn up the heat, as it were, on people that were about to go into transition
Mm-hmm.
to try to get reactions out of them. Like,
Right.
okay,
Yeah.
this person's about to graduate. He wants one of the apartments. Let's turn up the heat on him. And if he reacts negatively, he doesn't get anything. And we extend his time out, because I can guarantee you he'll act negatively. I have heard that firsthand in the meetings from the program directors. And I would just sit there shocked. Like, you guys are messing with people's lives. I wouldn't say that out loud, but that's what was happening there. They were messing with people's livelihoods and their freedom because they wanted to get a negative reaction, because they believed this person wasn't going to make it. That's not how you help people. That's how you hurt people in the end. That's why people, take their lives, or they go back to their drugs or their alcohol, is because you just destroy them even further. And it's not helping people, and it's truly sad.
Yeah, it's difficult, that one though, isn't it? Because again, it comes down to almost to that self-policing that is going on in these types of programs, where you have it ingrained in you that the right thing to do is write that person up, and if you don't, then you're worried about the consequences of somebody finding out that you should have and you didn't. Then you've also got the effect that the leadership like John Barrow has on these people, where they're willing to phone him up and cry and beg for another chance. Potentially you've got people who are trying to please the leadership and to prove that that they're worthy of John Barrow's attention, to be taken down to the beach and taken into the water and baptized by his hand. So they may feel the pressure to write somebody up because of that. There's just so much that you've said here that I think is interesting to go back to. Well, one of the things you mentioned about the lack of privacy within the program, and kind of men being there for 18 months, the likelihood of somebody that identifies with the LGBTQIA plus community coming through a Better Way Ministries, if so many students are being kind of brought into these programs, that it's inevitable that there have been some members of that community that have come through the doors of the program. I'm wondering if you know of any of those people, sort of how they've been treated, or perhaps you haven't known of anybody, but you have an idea of what may have happened if somebody did come out and identify as a member of that community group.
Well, when I was there, I identify with that group because I am bisexual. But when I came in there, it was beaten to my head that it was wrong to have those thoughts. I had seen about 2 people come through there. One I had ran into actually a couple of years after I had left that place at a hospital, and he, had admitted to me that he was gay, and I kept that quiet because I knew what would happen. He would be sent out of there, and funnily enough, he was actually sent out of there. They had sent him to Peachford, which is a mental health hospital, based here in Georgia. And then there was another man that came through there who was very openly gay. He didn't hide the fact, and he was also HIV positive.
Okay.
And he was very open with it. He would come over to where people were working out and would watch them work out and say, "Hey, you're looking good." And, I just took it as a compliment. It doesn't bother me. But certain people there that knew he was openly gay, they informed, the program director, and the program director asked him what he was doing. This is a Christian ministry. You can't be doing that here. They kicked him out after a week of being there because of that, along with him being HIV positive. Because they said that they couldn't have that kind of influence in the program, and he needed to go somewhere else. And along with that, the assistant program director went to Pure Life because he came out as being gay.
And Pure Life Ministries is the conversion therapy program that you mentioned at the start.
Yeah, he had gone there for a few years, and before he came back, they were always saying, "Oh, he's going to come back." And I literally heard staff members just making horrible jokes about him and his sexuality, saying things of like him coming back, he's going to do prostate checks on all of the students there. And they would just make all these horrible, offensive jokes about him, not caring. And then as soon as he came back, they acted like they never made any jokes about him.
And are they serious about doing prostate exams, or is that just an empty threat?
It was an offensive joke on the program director's part and the other staff members that were there. They would just make offensive jokes about him before he returned.
One last message today from our September sponsors, Help You Find Me, a digital if I go missing file that is end-to-end encrypted. No one can access this information without your prior permission, not even the guys at Netlandish who have developed this software, Help You Find Me. Going on a first date, or maybe even a long drive? Want to quickly share your location with a loved one? This is just one example of when Help You Find Me could be really useful in putting your mind at ease and also comforting family and friends who want to know that you are safe. Visit helpyoufind.me/HYFM cult for a 20% discount. That's helpyoufind.me/HYFM cult today. I mean, you mentioned before that it's an 18-month program and they're all men. So if anybody does identify with that community group, or maybe, or is thinking that they could potentially identify with that community group, then things are going to happen. That's what you said earlier in the episode. So, so when people in leadership come and say that they're going to start doing prostate exams, that's a gross misuse of power by people who have the ability to basically get people to submit to a prostate exam. That's awful.
Well, I mean, it's the way that it was said was in a joking manner because the person that was coming back was openly gay and had been to Pure Life. They were basically making a gay joke about him, a very offensive one. And it was just, the jokes would continue. And I think the worst thing, and this might be interesting to you, when they would do drug tests, they would literally say, "I have to see your penis in the cup because I have to make sure it is not a fake penis. Or you are not using a squeeze bottle full of clean urine." for the drug test. You would literally have to expose yourself to staff members if it was asked.
And that's something that we've heard previously on episodes that have covered the troubled teen industry, around people going and being submitted to things like when you were the CEDU program specifically, where people would go and be asked to strip off and have cavity searches.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't. It never went to that depth that I'm aware of. I've heard stories of certain things along those lines happening, but I can't confirm them nor deny them. But as far as what I experienced, the penis in the cup thing, that was a real statement said to me, and it had to happen multiple times. And to me, that was, it affected me, because from my standpoint, I suffered some childhood sexual abuse.
Right.
And it affected me, and it triggered me back to that. And I felt very uncomfortable with it. And there were times I refused. I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
They didn't care that you were abused as a child. It was something that had to be done. And it just felt abusive. It truly did. It felt highly abusive to me, and I just could not stand it. It makes no sense why you're asking these people. And I think the worst part is that when I came in there, there was really no age range for people that were allowed to come in there. No set age. They had a 17-year-old kid that came in there that had been there since he was 16. He graduated. He was supposed to graduate with me during my class graduation, but he obviously didn't. He ended up leaving. He had been there since he was 16 years old.
And he was expected to do the same thing with the penis in the cup.
I would not be surprised. And it bothers me if that happened, because he exhibited behavior to me that seemed like, he sort of, was possibly in the LGBT community, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was expected to do that as well with the drug tests, because that was expected of most people. Unless the drug test was given to you by a staff member or a leader or a house shepherd that didn't really want to go that far with it. Because there were plenty of people there that would never go that far with it. It was only the full-on diehard people that are what we called lifers that are still there working for them today.
And those are students that you think have been through the program?
Yes. There are multiple students I knew that were friends of mine at one point that are still there, and they are lifers. They are 100% about that place. They have drank the Kool-Aid to the point to where if you even try to speak to them, they won't speak to you, because at this point I'm blacklisted. I'm not allowed back on their property after I left, because they believe that I am a bad influence, because I left and moved on with my life, and I'm, quote unquote, as far as they're concerned, living a secular lifestyle without any sense of Christ in my life.
And it's interesting that you've basically been labeled an apostate and you're not allowed to return. Are there any other people you speak to from the program that have had a similar experience to you?
Oh yes, plenty of people. I have plenty of friends who just aren't allowed to return. There was a time about 2 or 3 years ago, I tried to go back in because I had lost my place that I was staying at the time, and I was told strictly staff decided. But before I was told that staff decided no, I was told specifically by the founder, John Barrow, that I could return at any time, and that I knew where they were located, and if I wanted to come back just to show up on property. And when I was getting ready to do that, I was told straight up. No, we decided he cannot return to the program. He's not allowed back here. Sorry. So I can't go onto the property. I can't go into their thrift store or anything along those lines. It's not allowed.
And there are others that have also graduated or worked for the program that are in similar positions to you.
Yes, there's plenty of them that are blacklisted and just they don't want anything to do with them. They look at all of us like we're the how can I put it? We're the demons and they're the angels and they don't want us around.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're the bad influence.
There's a few things still to go back on that you mentioned that I think are important for us to kind of iron out. And and you mentioned this in your initial contact with me, and you've mentioned it briefly in this episode today, and that's about how you were told to go and dig graves. And I'm just wondering, what was the purpose of that? What were they used for? How did that make you feel?
I never personally had to dig a grave, thankfully. I've had to experience seeing people dig the graves. I've had to watch over them as they dug the graves. The graves are one of the last resorts of punishment. It is the most extreme next to being sent out of there. What a grave is they will, when you're in the workhouse, you work, outside of the property. You work at the thrift store, the moving company, or even in the table shop building tables for Chick-fil-A, which is ironic because they build these big white long tables for Chick-fil-A. But when you would come back from a move, you would be drug tested and nicotine tested.
Right.
And if you failed the nicotine test, smoking a cigarette, chewing tobacco, stuff like that, you'd have to dig a grave. If you failed a drug test, you were given an option of basically digging a grave or going home or leaving, basically. And it was basically the last resort punishment. If there was a problem student there, they would save the grave for last. You would dig a grave, and it was a 4-foot deep grave. And it sounds just like what you think it is. And you would dig this, and you would wake up in the morning, you'd eat your breakfast, and you'd go outside in the hot Georgia sun. And living in the South, it gets very hot during the summer, and you would basically stand outside and given a shovel, and you would have to dig up this hard Georgia clay dirt that was very dry. It was like digging up concrete.
Right.
That had already solidified. And you would just have to dig and dig and dig until you were done. And then when you were done digging, you would write a letter about what you did. And you would basically, like, let's say you smoked a cigarette, you would write a letter saying, you're never going to smoke a cigarette again. What you did was wrong. And you were basically writing a letter to yourself and to that addiction or whatever it was that caused you to dig the grave. You would have to read off the letter and then place the letter in the ground and then bury it. Just fill it back in with dirt. And it didn't matter if it was pouring down rain outside. They would bring you a bucket and tell you to bell the water out of the hole.
Like, and this is just punishment. This isn't even the work-based stuff in the program.
No, this was just punishment.
Punishment for
a variety of things: smoking a cigarette, getting caught with a positive drug test, or just being what they consider a repeat offender student.
Okay, and most likely or more likely to be involved in this type of punishment if you were coming up to your graduation date.
I've seen a few people where that was a thing that would happen right before graduation. They would get wrote up for something that you would find, you'd consider erroneous personally, but they would find just the smallest things to give you constant write-ups, basically to where you would have to dig a grave.
Yeah.
And the worst part was they would come inside afterwards. their hands would be blistered and bloodied and torn up.
Gosh.
And they'd be sunburned, or they'd have sun poisoning or even heat stroke. They didn't really care. They would take water out to you, but it was very rarely. Like, you could come inside, get a glass of water real quick, but then you'd have to go back out. You couldn't speak to nobody, and you couldn't stop digging that grave until it was done. I saw people have to take an entire week to dig one because the ground was so hard. And their body was torn up by the time they were done. And it was like splinters in their hands, cuts, blisters.
Oh my goodness.
They didn't care. They were like, okay, there you go. It's basically, just punishing yourself and injuring yourself because they felt it was right to punish you in that manner.
Where are these instructions coming from for them to punish the students in this way?
They would come from, they had a list of, they had guidebooks or rule books, if you were, and they basically got their punishments, most of them, from Teen Challenge.
Okay, yeah.
So
this rule book is written by John Barrow, who attended and knows the owner or the creator or founder of Teen Challenge.
The rule book isn't really written by him. The only things that are written by him or the staff are like, they take mentions of Teen Challenge out, but the rule book is identical to Teen Challenge.
Which we've seen copies of on this podcast. I've uploaded a couple of copies to my Instagram page as well for anybody that wants to go and scroll through my posts and have a look at that. Somebody I interviewed previously on the show did send me their copy of their Teen Challenge rulebook, so that should give anyone an idea if they want to go and have a look. Something else you mentioned in your initial emails to me as well, that came sort of with the graves, was the incidents around laughing at suicidal ideation, and I just wondered if you could talk us through that briefly.
As far as that is concerned, when I was out there, there was a student who was brought into what was eventually turned into the new transition house for soon-to-be graduates. It was called the intake house. And this student had threatened to kill himself with a knife. And people were just, I overheard staff laughing about this as you had 6 or 7 police cars roll in. And they went in there and they pulled this student out and they took him to a hospital, to get him checked out, make sure everything was fine. And staff members were laughing about it, finding it hilarious, that they've got like 6 cops on there. It was entertainment for students and staff.
Jeez, oh my goodness.
They found it hilarious, and I'm sitting there going, this is the furthest thing from funny, that you guys find this hilarious. And I'm just like, this is what happens when they would bring in people that had mental, severe issues, as far as mental disorders are concerned, mental health disorders. If you had a mental health disorder and you were prescribed medication, you weren't allowed to take the medication while you were there.
What was the reasoning for that? Because if you did God's work, then that would be the cure.
They believed that what the medicine did was it would cloud your mind and change your brain chemistry, and it was akin to still using drugs, because they believed that if you were on the medication, you weren't following God or the Bible, and he wasn't your main source of relief as far as this was concerned. I've seen people come in there that had to be on psychoactive drugs for, hallucinations and schizophrenia, and they were immediately taken off this medication and just told, okay, you can't take this anymore. No more depression medication, no more medication to stop hallucinations, auditory or visual, nothing for your PTSD. You have to function normally by just reading your Bible. and that will take care of your brain and your mind. It'll
Wow.
get rid of all that stuff. We don't care how suicidal you think you are. You're going to do this. And if you don't, you can just leave.
That's there's so many issues with that. Just that this person may have been receiving this medication for a number of years and finally, found a balance with kind of managing their mental ill health, and they've come to this place where they're stripped of that, and then could potentially be a danger to themselves or other people, or be pushed back so many steps that they've managed to achieve in finding themselves in a place of functioning. And there's so many problems with just taking people off medication and not believing that it works. I mean, the program did go from a drug and alcohol program to a life controlling issues program, but I don't agree with taking people off of medication that's been prescribed to them by accredited and professional doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists, especially when these people themselves have no professional training or certification to be making those decisions for that person, or taking those decisions away from the person themselves, if that makes sense.
It does. When I came into that program, I suffer from bipolar, and I now have PTSD, and along with that, I have manic depressive disorder. I was on medications at one point in time when I was a young teenager, went off of it because it had helped, and then it started to slowly come back after my parents had passed. And I was told, okay, you're not going to need any medication while you're here. The only medications that they considered safe for you to take while you were there were Tylenol or Advil, or you could have laxatives, which led to another issue. A student gained a eating disorder while they were there, and were abusing the laxatives that were given out during med.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
And they stopped the student from taking them every day, but they still let them use it every other day. Along with that, you weren't allowed any strong pain medication. So let's say you had to go to the hospital because you had broken an ankle. You weren't allowed any actual narcotics because all the hospitals have the address for the property marked down as a rehab program. So you weren't allowed narcotics. So you basically had to take some ibuprofen and just, deal with it. Or, if you had, there was one person that came through, a couple of people that came through there that were on cholesterol medications and heart meds.
Yeah.
They were allowed to take those, obviously. And then there was another person that came through there that over time was told he had throat cancer. So I personally had to take him to the hospital for chemo treatments.
Right.
And at the time when the ministry found this out, they're like, we're going to make a documentary and we're going to use him as the focal point.
Right.
They had me recording him as the focal point to show that the ministry was basically helping him get the treatment he needed, when in reality, he was getting financial aid from the hospital, and it was all paid for by the hospital, not by the program. The only thing the program did medical-wise was you would be taken to the hospital if need be, or if you needed emergency treatment like he did, or if you needed dental work done, they would take you to a dentist that would take care of your teeth for free, and it was only via extractions.
Oof.
And if you got the extractions, and I'm pretty sure you probably had from that sound, you weren't allowed any narcotics. You were allowed
Oh
ibuprofen.
no, stop. Oh
Yep.
no. Oh, I like even after having two babies and the amount of blood tests and injections and needles involved with kind of carrying a child and birthing a child, I'm not good with needles, and I had a bad experience with a dentist when I was younger who promised me that they wouldn't inject me in the gum, and when I wasn't paying attention they injected me in the gum, and to this day going to the dentist is very triggering for me because I don't trust them at all. And I have to now be able to see when somebody is going to inject me. And they always say, look away when you're getting your flu shot or your COVID jab or you're having a blood test. And they say, look away. And I say, no, I can't. I need to see when you're going to do it. So much so to the point that when I had to have a filling in one of my teeth, this was years ago. They had to give me an intravenous injection in my hand because I wouldn't let them do it in my gum, and they had to put me under just to give me a filling. That's how bad it is. So when you're telling me that they're going to extract a tooth without any pain relief at all, like I can't even, that to me is not something that I can comprehend.
Well, the thing with the teeth extractions were they would give you the lidocaine shots in your gum line or in the roof of your mouth if needed.
Oof, okay.
And I had a few teeth that I needed to get pulled because they were very bad in my teeth. Have never been amazing. So, I mean, the one thing I can give to this program as a positive was they did take care of your dental.
Okay.
They would even offer certain people, I never saw it happen, but they had offered me when I was on staff, John Barrow had told me, I'll get you some new teeth, some false teeth, some implants done so we can take care of those back rows of your teeth that are missing.
Okay.
Never happened though. They changed their mind because it would cost too much. But the only reason they did this with the dentist was because this dentist would write off these extractions as tax write-offs as a charitable donation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the dentist would get some money out of this in the long run. But the funny thing was that they would pull your teeth, and the dentist that they took us to, he was a good dentist. But there was one time when I did have one tooth that started acting up, and they couldn't get me into this dentist because he can only see so many people a month as far as, charitable donations is concerned on his taxes. So I would have to wait 2 months. I couldn't wait 2 months. I had two teeth. They took me to a random dentist.
Oof, okay.
And this was when they used to take the students to, and the dentist did a tax write-off and pulled them that day. I got ibuprofen and antibiotics, but, I was able to stand the pain, funnily enough, because to me, once the tooth is pulled, it's gone. But they did some good things as far as medical stuff like that was concerned. If you had to go to the hospital, they'd take you, obviously. Because they don't want to be liable for anything. But it was the fact of the matter was that you would have to, because this led up to, your graduation stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sort of going to go off here for a second, but at the end of graduation, when I was getting ready to get out of there, they had announced a new program where once you graduate, you get a paycheck for all the days that you worked off property for the moving company or in the thrift store or whatever. They would put approximately, now this is the shocker, $5 a day into an account for you.
Right.
Think about this. We got paid $5 a day to work on a moving truck or in a thrift store, well below minimum wage, because it's, it was all ministry based. It was all connected up to the ministry. So he could get around certain labor laws and certain legalities that way. But then at the end of the program, you would be given this check. but there would be deductions from your money if you every time you had to have a tooth pulled or you had to go to the hospital. They would
Right.
take money off. They would always take a certain amount out, and it ranged anywhere from $10 to $100, and money would be taken out of these checks, and that would lead to people not wanting to go to the ER or go to the dentist. They would just deal with it. And the thing with the money was you were given this money at the end, and once you were given the money, most people took the money and they put it back into some part of the ministry, whether it was buying a car that was practically a lemon from their car dealership, their used car dealership. I fell into that trap. I bought a 92 Toyota minivan that was actually valued at $200 for $800, and it had a lot of issues with it. So half my money was already gone. But people would take their money and they just spend it on like getting a car because they figure, hey, I can get a good deal on this car. Or they would take their money and they would stay at the ministry because the money wasn't enough to leave on.
No.
It was around $1,500, so basically a stimulus check.
Yeah.
It was enough to live comfortably for maybe a month or so, but then you were out of luck. So most people would stay there as staff members. So I came on as staff and I started out as a driver. I would drive people back and forth to probation, to the hospital, or I would take people to drop them off because they were leaving the program. So I would drop them off at a bus stop in Palmetto with a MARTA card, which is, a bus fare card, to basically get them to Atlanta to the Greyhound bus depot, which is one of the worst spots to go to in Atlanta if you're homeless, and just send them there. And I was being paid approximately $125 a week. And I was having to live in a house with students. And I was a staff member because they didn't have an apartment ready for me. And if I did get an apartment, I was expected to pay $450 a month for rent. And I was expected to do that with $125 a week when I had to worry about car insurance, gas money, groceries, a cell phone.
Yeah.
I couldn't focus on all that because I was like, there's no way I can pay that much and still work for you guys. Or live here in an apartment. So I had, it was just ridiculous of how much money they would take out of people's, end of graduation checks for a tooth getting pulled. It's insane.
It almost comes back to not the self-policing that we were speaking about before, but the dependency on the organization to remain a part of it, because you're not like you said, you're not earning enough to leave, but you've got the incentive to stay because you are earning something. And you don't know when you leave how long it might take for you to earn something on the outside. So you're staying here where you're given a little bit, which is enough to, on your free time, on your Saturdays, when you've got some free time, maybe you can go to the cinema or take part in something that's not going to get you caught out if you have one of these random drug tests. But at the same time, it's not, as you said, it's not enough to move away from there and be independent. So they're almost kind of keeping you on that crutch of being dependent on the organization itself, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I sort of want to wind it back to, if you stayed there as a staff member and you lived in one of these duplexes, which was basically an apartment, you had one whole side to yourself if you were lucky enough to do that. Because each side had 2 bedrooms and like 1 bathroom. They were nice little duplexes. But the problem with that was, I looked at it like this. If you came in without paying them any money, what you were doing by paying them the rent was you putting money back in that you you know didn't pay them before, and them only giving you 125 a week. It's never enough for you to leave there, because if you tried to leave that place on 125 a week, you would never save up enough money if you were renting. And I think that was sort of my blessing in the end, was I didn't get into the apartment really
Yeah.
in time. I stayed there for a little bit, but then after that, I was like, I can't keep paying this rent. I have to go. And the thing with the money is that I tried to find a job that actually paid, because at the time I was like, I appreciate you guys giving me a staff position. It's really cool. I like sort of doing this, but I need to make more money so I can get on my feet now that I've graduated.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I had gotten a connection with a cleaning company that was based at Pinewood Studios that took care of the movie lots.
Yeah.
Because one of the people there at the time, he was the one that got the contracts and stuff for Pinewood for Better Way, because of his connections in the film industry. And I'd gone out there for the interview. I was going to start that Monday coming up. I went back to the property. I sat down with the program director, told him what was going on. I was all excited. I said, I'll be able to pay y'all's rent and also take care of my living expenses and not
that must be so exciting after all this time, to have the prospect of being independent and relying only on yourself because you've got this job opportunity. That must be amazing after all this time, and inspiring and exciting to have all this kind of going on and feeling like you're finally going to be your own person.
But I think the worst part was after I explained this to him, he looked at me dead in the eyes, very serious tone, and said, well, Dustin, I hate to say it, but you're going to have to leave here in a couple of weeks if you take that job.
Right.
We can't have you stay here on the property in one of the apartments, which is what I found hilarious, because there were people that stayed on that property that had jobs outside of that ministry that they still allowed to stay there, but they wouldn't let me do it because I was their guy as far as driving was concerned.
Right.
I was that person that did that and took over the handing out the write-up sheets and did all that stuff, the work they didn't want to do, because they didn't want me to make enough money. And it was just like, we got to keep you close, but we don't want you to make too much money so you get away from us. And it was also brought up the fact that, excuse me, the time I had started smoking cigarettes again. And they were very upset with that. They said that smoking a cigarette was taking me away from God.
Right.
So I found that hilarious, because there were people there that were smoking cigarettes, just not on property. And I told them, hey, I smoke cigarettes, just not on property. You couldn't even have an energy drink if you were a student there. Like, you weren't allowed energy drinks or Mountain Dew. Anything high caffeine like that wasn't allowed. So, I was like, I even drink energy drinks, and they thought I was like the devil himself incarnate, but they didn't want me to leave there, because I think it was mainly due to my family ties to John Barrow. That my family had been close friends with him. We had known him for so long that, there was a bunch of staff members there that I knew personally, because they were connected to my family in one way or another.
Yeah.
And it was just, all these people were like, don't leave, man, I got all the love in the world for you. But it was like, as soon as I left there, you had staff members that completely relapsed, gone back into the program, or have left and gone into a sober living place, and they're doing way better than what they were. Or there's just people that are in prison or in jail, or they're in the ground now. And that place just drained everybody of everything they had, mentally, emotionally, and physically.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like your existence when you're there's a few things I think we can break it down to almost here. From an outsider's perspective anyway, you've got the program when you're a student. It becomes your whole identity because all of your time is taken up by activities surrounding either the church and spiritual side of A Better Way Ministries, or the work-based stuff that leaves you physically exhausted as opposed to psychologically tired, which the religious side of things could do, because so much of you is expected to be devoted to the work around the Bible and Christianity and the messages of God, and the work that John Barrow wants you to put into these programs. And then on the flip side of that, when you become a staff member, you're living, not only are you living on the property, but you're told that if you want to go and get a job elsewhere, you're going to have to leave here. And you personally, you've got, like you've said, you've got family members who are tied up in the program, who are tied up with the leader, who have a history going back with the program itself. So a lot of your identity at this point is tied up in the organization, and it's almost like you'll struggle to find yourself and to find yourself separate from this program, because you're so intrinsically tied up with all of it, whether it's from the perspective of a student or from the perspective of a staff member, which we know from your emails to me you go on to become at some point. And it's hard, because then you've said that people leave the program and they relapse and they join other programs that seem to be more successful. You talked about that one person who was abusing the laxatives because they developed an eating disorder, which is another form of abuse, of self-abuse, but also another form of control. So perhaps, if you're feeling like you have no control over yourself or what you're eating or your leisure time, or what you can and cannot do, or how long you sleep for, or what you watch on TV, perhaps the only power you feel like you can have on your life at that point is your weight gain and your weight loss, and you've managed to access that by abusing the laxatives that are available to you, because no other type of substance is available to you. If somebody is abusing the laxatives in the program, that to me says that the work around substance and alcohol abuse and life controlling issues that this program promises to fix, it's not fixing those issues, because people are developing them whilst they're attending the program.
Yeah, and that's the scary thing about that place is, they put you on this, calorie deficit diet throughout the week, but on the weekend, which everybody looked forward to, and I understood why after a while, was they would purchase like full sheet birthday cakes from the grocery store, buckets of ice cream,
right?
Cases of sodas, and people would get a piece of cake and some ice cream and some soda, and they could drink as much sodas as they wanted to on Saturday evenings, and if there was extra cake, they could have extra cake, extra ice cream, they could have that. And you would get this treat on the weekend as like a cheat day from your forced diet while you were there. And you would also, have access to a snack haul on the weeknight, which was usually like a granola bar or something like that. And, they would basically make you not eat certain things during the week. And then on the weekends, it was basically junk food heaven. Like, you'd get cookies and cakes and donuts and all of this stuff. But then during the weekdays, you were forced to eat, either rice or chicken. The amount of food they portioned out, I understood the portioning, but the calorie deficit was what was very scary, because there's people there that needed to eat, just enough food, or, they can get very sick. We had diabetics there that would get special amounts of food. People that were hypoglycemic would get special amounts of food, but they would expect you to eat this. And if they thought you were overweight, you could only eat salads, no bread.
Wow. So your diet's completely restricted if they perceived you as being overweight.
Oh, yeah. Because when I had attempted to go back in there, I was told if I came back in, I'd have to go on a restricted diet to where I only ate salads. I wasn't allowed sweets or sodas. I could only drink water, so no Gatorade, no sweet tea, no lemonade. I could only eat certain amounts of food. Breakfast was practically cut out because breakfast was usually, a spoonful of eggs, English muffin, and some ham.
Right.
And I couldn't have any of that. I'd have to basically eat a salad, and in the mornings they would just give you a bowl of cold oatmeal or grits.
Oh gosh.
And then at lunchtime, you couldn't have the sandwich because it had bread. So you were given another salad. And the salads were very tiny. Like ridiculously small salads.
And that makes no sense because since having my daughter, I've been trying to count my calories and try and kind of regulate my weight since going through the whole pregnancy thing and having a baby and realizing when you count calories that there really isn't anything in vegetables and salad, and you can basically eat as much of that green stuff as you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I found that out. It's funny, I found that out recently, that there's no actual nutritional value in that stuff. Even though they would force that onto you, they felt you were overweight. They would make you do that, and then they would make you work out in the gym for a certain amount of time.
On a calorie deficit and a not a balanced diet, on just a kind of a green diet.
Yeah, so people were basically starving themselves, and for a little bit there, they had me on a diet for, I think, about a month, though. They told me I could decide what I wanted to cut out, and I said, okay, I'll cut out sugar for a month. So I cut out like honey buns and sodas and cakes and ice cream, and I just ate what we had for dinner. I only ate 1 meal a day. That was it. 1 meal a day, and that was dinner. And that was usually fish and rice, or rice and chicken and some other vegetable. But I couldn't have the rolls. But I could eat as much of the rice, and I could eat a little of the rice, but I could eat a good amount of the chicken because it was protein. So for about a month or a couple of months there, I was on this, diet that I was told to choose because they wanted me to lose weight. And I lost so much weight so quickly because I was just starving myself. Practically, I was eating 1 meal a day, and It was very, very low as far as calories are concerned. And that sort of followed me over into my personal life, where I have to catch myself sometimes, because there's days where I'll just eat dinner, and that's it. And I just don't eat anything else. Or there's certain days where I won't eat anything because it's just like, I feel like I've gained so much weight, and it's like that disorder that I actually ended up forming followed me here outside of the program and has stuck around, because you're told, hey, you're overweight, lose this weight, because if not, it's going to kill you. And they basically will make people get eating disorders. And it does
sound that way, yeah.
There's people that came in there that were around 450 pounds, forced them onto a diet. They didn't lose much weight, like at all. They lost maybe 20 pounds, 20, 30 pounds during their time there. And they would force these people to get eating disorders, and they still do it, and it's scary.
Wow, 450 pounds.
And he was still expected to do all the labor work that everybody else did.
Yeah, I was going to ask that when you talked about kind of developing this only eating one meal a day that did not have sufficient calories in, were you still expected to be doing this work-based program?
Oh, yes, definitely. You were always expected to be doing it. And that was the scary thing, was that they, expected you to be just doing all this work, even if you were on this forced diet that they would put you on. You were expected to do the work because they looked at it like that was also part of your exercise. So if you're out there sweating while you're moving people's furniture on a move for the moving company, which is what they had me doing for a good majority of my time there, was on the moving truck, or I worked on the donation truck going to pick up furniture and workout equipment, and just it was extremely hard manual labor, to the point where, with the weight I had when I went in there and all of the labor they had me do, I mean, it's caused me to have physical injuries, to the point to where I can't even work a normal 9 to 5, job at like a warehouse or a factory.
Wow.
It's
So when
it's
you
ridiculous.
talk about not only is it the PTSD that you developed since your experiences within A Better Way Ministries, you've also experienced the difficulty around regulating your diet and managing your meals daily, to the point where sometimes you're only having one meal a day. That now you've also got these physical issues with your body that prevent you from being able to actually work a suitable job that you may require to be able to provide for yourself.
Yeah, it's right now I'm basically I work from home, so um, that's the one thing that I actually take joy in, is being able to work from home. But I can't work an actual decent job that requires physical labor without being in pain, because my weight, it'll balloon up a good bit or it'll jump down depending on what's going on with me mentally at that point. It could jump up because there's times where I just can't control my food intake. I could sit down and eat an entire package of cupcakes, or a bag of chips, and drink like 7 sodas during the day, and still not be full. Like, still feel the need to just eat. Because when I was there, the freedom of food choices, it was limited until you reached the transition house.
Right.
Which was because once you reached transition, you were getting ready to graduate. So they started actually paying you an actual paycheck if you were on the moving company and stuff along those lines. So people could go out and purchase, food and things along those lines.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so so let me just kind of think about all these things you've just said. So there's obviously you have these issues around food where you're either completely binging out on absolutely anything that you can find or anything that you want in quantities that you're not even regulating, and then the next day you're not eating anything apart from one meal. So there's kind of like both sides of the spectrum there. And then there's also this transition now that you're speaking about, where you're gearing up to graduate, but you haven't quite graduated. And they're like, oh, just before you go, actually, we're not going to regulate your diet anymore. You have access to all this great food. And we're also going to start giving you money so that when it comes to time for you to graduate, maybe you'll think about staying with us and working for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the scary thing, is as soon as we started getting that money, everybody was like, oh, we can go to the store now. People would go to like Walmart or Target or something. Most people would spend their money on stupid things. Like, somebody was like, let's say they wanted like a brand new pair of Nikes. They would buy their Nikes because they wanted their Nikes. Mm-hmm. Or, you wanted to go out to eat, because the hilarious thing was, the part of Sonoya where this is at, Sonoya is a very small town. It's also the main town where The Walking Dead is filmed at.
I'm just rewatching that. Literally started yesterday rewatching that series. It's so funny that you've said that.
So that town has a lot of restaurants. It's a very touristy, sort of laid back place. And it's a great town. I'm never going to bash that little town. Yeah, it's an amazing place to visit if you ever get a chance. It's awesome. Okay. But the thing with the placement of that program, he chose that placement because it's out in the country almost. It's like 2 minutes away from the main, like, downtown section of Sonoya.
Okay. Where so if anybody that's watched The Walking Dead, when you say it's sort of out of town, you mentioned that you're kind of in and around Atlanta, which I know is where the first series is set, because I'm watching it right now, as I've just said. And then Sonoya, is that more like season 2 where they're at the farm and it's kind of really rural farmland and outside of the city, but still quite close to the city?
Sonoya, the main town of Sonoya was basically Alexandria.
Right.
The film set, you probably know this very much just like I do, the set where they drive up to the big metal, like, sheet metal gates and stuff of that little town.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's in the main town. And the town center where the governor was running things, that is actually downtown Sonoya on the main drag.
Okay, yep. So anybody that's watched the popular series The Walking Dead, you'll be able to visualize exactly what Sonoya looks like. But less sepia, perhaps, because I know that they love to use those types of filters on that show.
Yeah, and funny enough, the thrift store, that the program uses. We actually had gotten, I don't know how they got this connection. They had gotten connections with the studio that's out in Sonoya. That they do some of the shooting for Walking Dead at, where we actually I went to the studio and picked up leftover clothing from the series to take to the thrift store to be sold in store.
Okay, interesting.
So they had, when I say they have connections within the movie and TV industry, I'm not joking. It's a lot. But to get back to what I was saying, where that town is located, it's a major hotspot.
Yeah.
So a bunch of people are going to come through there, and they're going to be like, oh, what's this big place out there? I mean, it got to the point to where recently, and I will have to send you the photographs, Kanye West came out to the property.
Right.
Which was very interesting. But the place that they have, that town, there's a lot of restaurants there. So when the students get their money, they're going into this town to buy all this food.
Mm-hmm.
And there were students there that were diabetic that shouldn't be eating half that stuff.
Right.
But, we weren't, allowed to eat what we wanted. So, of course, we're going to go to, like, the chicken wing place down the street.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's only natural. Like, anyone that's on a diet, like, that they've imposed on themselves.
Yeah.
And then, one day a week where they kind of let themselves have the day off, or eventually you just fall off your diet and just completely binge on everything. It's the same. I think most people listening can think back to a time where they've kind of said, I'm going to go on a diet, and it hasn't stuck because there's been kind of a day where they've been like, oh, we're at a birthday party and there's birthday cake, so I'm just going to have a bit of birthday cake and all this buffet food, and then the next day they're like, well, I've broken my diet, so I'm just going to carry on kind of not paying attention to it. And I guess that's the same thing for this experience, but maybe on a more impulsive or a more urgent scale, to go out to these restaurants with your money and on the weekends and go and indulge yourself in those things that you've been restricted on throughout the week.
Yeah, well, I mean, the best thing really was can't believe I'm gonna say this is the best thing, but when you were still a student, just a normal student, and you had gone to the workhouse and you were told, because after 3 months you went from intake to workhouse, so you were done working on property. So if you got into the moving company, which you would always hope you did, or onto the donation truck, if you were given tips by customers, you could then take said tips and go out to eat afterwards.
Okay.
It's just something
Okay.
to eat. So
Yeah.
people on the moving truck, they had actual employees on the moving truck that have graduated the program and had no real affiliation anymore besides working for the company. They would end up taking these students out, and there were plenty of times where I would go out after a long move to like a buffet restaurant or IHOP to get like an omelet at like 11 o'clock at night, or go to like a $17 burger restaurant to get like the most expensive thing I can get, because you would be allowed to spend your tip on your food. So
Right.
if you got like a $20 tip, you could spend your $20 tip on food, but you had to bring back receipts for everything, because there were people that would buy things like cigarettes or kratom. I don't know if you know what kratom is. Um, Kratom is a naturally occurring opioid in a plant. It's like it basically helps people come off heroin without having to go on Suboxone or anything. And it's
Right.
also used for like pain relief and things along those nature. And it's actually very helpful, but people in the program they knew of gas stations that when they rung up things like kratom or let's say beer or cigarettes as just a grocery item and not as what it actually was, that they could get away with getting a kratom bag or a shot bottle of kratom and taking it, and then or smoking a cigarette or drinking a beer and then going out to get like a burger at McDonald's, and they could get away with using kratom and stuff along those lines, because these gas station uh drugs would show up as just grocery items. So people were still finding ways to use while they were there. It's just they never really got caught. So you would have to show your receipt, and if your receipt came out like, oh, you spent such and such amount of money, was that your tip? You'd be like, yeah, I got a $10 tip from the customer. They would then turn around, contact the customer, find out how much you were tipped. And then if the money was wrong, like let's say they actually tipped you $50 and you said they only tipped you 20, he would ask where the rest of the money was at. Because if you didn't spend all that
What?
money, yeah, you had to bring back a certain percentage back to him to give in. You had to have at least, I think, $10 left or something. Like if you got like $100 tip, you weren't allowed to keep the $100 tip. You could spend upwards to $20 out of the $100 tip. And then you had to bring a receipt for what you spent that on. But it had to be just food or beverages. And then you had to give the rest of the tip money to him, which would then go into his pocket, which would then go into the Dropbox deposits for the company.
So, so your food is being restricted,
Mm-hmm.
but then your money is also being monitored along with your calls home and your meetings with your family.
Yes.
It's really hard for me to imagine as somebody kind of with an outsider's perspective. There's so much here, and I know we could probably talk for hours and hours about all of these experiences. And that there that you've mentioned about the tips, I feel like is not something that we would have discussed if we just went through the interview questions that I sent you ahead of time. I feel like this is like a kind of like a little side bit that's come out that is still really important, but just through you being able to kind of speak through your experience and your narrative. And hopefully there's a couple more bits for you to kind of explain to the listeners before we finish our interview today. But there are a few important points that I wanted to make sure we do cover before we finish today. And one of them is to discuss this infamous Waffle House that you mentioned earlier on in the episode. And I'm just wondering if you could talk us through why you called it the infamous Waffle House.
This Waffle House was right next to the highway on-ramp. So they specifically would drop people off here because this is where they started dropping people off at. They would drop you off there because the management didn't really care.
Right.
And if you think about it, it's a very humiliating experience because what you're leaving with is a garbage bag or two of your belongings. They are in garbage bags. If you came in with suitcases, they were most likely donated to the thrift store.
Wow. Okay.
Because
Okay.
they don't really care about your personal stuff when you come in with it. It becomes the Ministries.
Is there a lot of stuff from people's personal possessions then that are donated to the thrift store, like things that aren't in line with perhaps what A Better Way Ministries thinks that you should be wearing or using whilst you're there?
Oh yeah, definitely. If you came in with and I've heard this from people specifically, and it almost happened to me when I had showed back up there for a little bit. If you come into that program with a vehicle, that vehicle is no longer yours. You have to donate it to the ministry.
Like a whole, like a car or van or camper van or motorbike or anything like that. Oh my goodness. Okay, so that's a bit different to an item of clothing.
Yeah, you don't own it anymore. It goes to the ministry to be sold at the car lot. It's basically their way of making you pay them. Because if you don't have any family or friends that can take the vehicle or refuse to take it, you've got to get rid of it. You can't keep it. So, I mean, I left later on that day after like 2 hours of being there because I didn't want to get rid of my vehicle. Just we went so off topic here.
Yeah, no, sorry, that was my fault because I wanted to know sort of if anybody's personal possessions were being kind of given to the thrift store when they arrive.
There's a ton of that. There's people who have left and their family has come up there the next day to get their belongings.
Right.
And all of their belongings are gone. There was one student who came in there, had $200 shoes, and his shoes were gone, his clothes were gone. And all they would tell this person's family was, hey, we don't have it anymore. It's been spread out and given to the other students here at the property that needed it more than your family member. We do apologize. They've done that to everybody. I had clothes that I had left there that I had purchased myself. That if your clothes get left behind after you leave there, or you just don't take it with you, it becomes their property.
Right. Okay.
Like they won't protect your stuff. They'll donate it to the thrift store or give it to other people. They don't care.
Yeah. Right. Okay. That's definitely, I think that's definitely an important tangent to go on. But we were speaking about the infamous Waffle House before I cut you off and sent us on that tangent.
The Waffle House, they would send you there because it was a humiliation tactic, in my opinion. You're being dropped off at a Waffle House with no one to call. But most people that would be dropped off there would get a hold of their family members because their family members would be informed that, such and such has been, released from the program because he refused to follow the rules, or such and such has decided to leave the program. So the person would have a chance to contact their family member before the trip to the Waffle House or the trip to the bus stop that we would drop them off at while I was there near the end. They would be given that opportunity. So most people would get picked up by family members. Because if you hear your son or your brother or your father is, at a Waffle House with 2 garbage bags full of clothes and no money, nothing to his name,
yeah,
you're going to go pick him up. I've never really heard of any stories of people being dropped off at the Waffle House with nowhere to go. They usually would be picked up by family members. Same thing for the bus station. I only heard like 1 or 2 stories of people that never got picked up that are basically living in Atlanta on the streets now because of it. They don't really, they don't care where you go after you get dropped off, as long as it's not back to the program. Because if you leave, you leave. You're done in their eyes. You turned your back on them. They don't want you. I've had a friend who wound up homeless on the streets and begged to come back in, and they wouldn't let him come back in. They just wouldn't. But now he's doing good. Now he's got a job and he's living good now.
Good for him.
It's just they use it as humiliation tactic.
Yeah.
Because these people see you coming in there with garbage bags and you're sitting there with no money, and they'll give you like coffee and food because they know what was going on. But then after a while, they stopped allowing us to drop people off there. So we had to start buying these bus passes and dropping them off at a bus station and being like, okay, you can go to Atlanta on this. What happens after that is up to you. You messed up, not our fault. Sorry. And, you know, I've experienced people in the backseat of the car saying, pull over the car. I'm not going anywhere with y'all. This is kidnapping. And, you know, the person that was driving the vehicle would be like, this isn't kidnapping. I'm taking you to the bus station. And they'd be like, no, you're kidnapping me. Pull over. I do not want to go there. Pull over. And just refuse to pull over. And it would take that guy, you know, starting to kick out the back window for the vehicle to stop. You're forcing these people, you know, to leave there immediately, sometimes not even getting a hold of their family members because you don't want them there, and you're forcing them to get into a vehicle and forcibly taking them somewhere they don't want to go. In my opinion, that does fall in line with kidnapping, but, you know, it was ridiculous. They would do this stuff to humiliate people, to just, you know, throw them out to the wolves, as it were, and just not care.
And you said that if people were taken because they wanted to leave, they were told not to come back. But you've done this. You've been taken to this infamous Waffle House, and actually, you ended up staying in the program for 2 years and then becoming a staff member. And I'm just wondering kind of how the process happened for you personally.
I was working in the thrift store in the back room. I was going through the donation bags that were picked up from either donation runs or donation box pickups.
Yeah.
These were basically black trash bags full of clothing and items that could be either resold or not. I would basically stand back there and for 8 hours a day, just on my feet, digging through these trash bags. And it doesn't matter what I ran into, how horrible it was, because I think the worst part was dealing with this was occasionally the property would come infested with bed bugs because some of the clothing that was being brought back was, you know, straight out of garbage bags that just got picked up from somebody's house and they had bed bugs in there.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
So I dealt with that firsthand, and it was probably the worst experience of my life at the program. But I just got tired of doing it. And on occasion, they would have these people come in there that were there to do community service. It was usually a female that was there for community service, you know, non-violent offenders. They would do their community service there, helping out, take clothing that was good out to the floor, up to the manager for them to look at after I had looked it over and deemed it was good. And they, you know, they would come back there and they talk to us, and you would just realize, you know, these people, they're just going through community service here. They're only here for a couple of hours a day. We're here for a very long time. And it got to the point to where I just wanted to leave. So I, you know, was ready to go. I told them when I got back I wanted to leave. I had gotten a hold of a pack of cigarettes. So they found that out real quick and they were mad about that. But they let me have the pack of cigarettes. And I got in the van. They dropped me off along with somebody else. It was another person who had some mental health issues. that were pretty serious. And me and him got dropped off, and I just sat out there and I chain smoked like 4 or 5 cigarettes, and I gave him a few cigarettes, and we sat there and we talked. I went inside, I grabbed the Waffle House phone, I called the number up, I talked to him, and they were like, all right, if you want to come back, you got to say it again louder for everybody to hear. And everybody heard, and I had to say it like 5 or 6 times that I'm sorry.
Yeah. And this is what you mentioned at the start of the episode. You're on speakerphone to the congregation.
Yeah, and they knew that I had left, and then when I came back in there, the shepherd over the property, he was a friend of mine at the time. He came and picked me up, and he let me have like another cigarette before I got back into the vehicle. And we got there, and I just sat there, and he stopped. He grabbed me a drink and something to eat. And we got back to the property, and I sat there and I ate my burger and I drank my soda and ate my fries. And I went inside, and they were like, the prodigal son has returned. And I just walked up towards the front. Everybody was cheering and happy. Some people looked at me and shook their heads because they were just shocked that I had left, or upset that I left and I came back because, I didn't want to be there anymore. And I guess it bothered them that I was let back in, or it bothered them that I decided to come back.
Yeah. So mixed reaction.
Yeah, it was very mixed. And the next day, the guys over in the old transition house were getting ready to graduate, and one of them knew that I had left and come back. They had saw me leave the previous day, and they were sort of upset. And he just looked at me and he straight up said to me, don't let this shit get to you, man. Don't let them beat you down. You get out of here. You graduate, you complete, and you leave. Don't let them beat you into the ground like they did everybody else.
Yeah.
And that was the most meaningful talk I've had. I had talks with people there that were from that house. Those people were the most genuine people. And, one of them is no longer with us. And it hurts because I remember when he died, we got told, he had overdosed. And we were all at the warehouse getting ready to work that day. And I couldn't even work. I didn't want to work. Me and my friend that were on the truck, we talked about going to use kratom, even though that sounds silly. It's still considered a drug, and we wanted to get messed up. And it still hurts me knowing that there's so many people from that place that are no longer with us. And I think that death hit me really hard because of what he said to me that day. I mean, I considered him a friend. I had another friend that passed away. There's multiple people I've known that have passed away from that place, and it kills me every time because it doesn't seem like they cared when these people would die. They didn't care because they just looked at it like it's another person that just gave up. And I'm like, you guys have to have some complicity, some responsibility for this blood that's on your hands. They do. Half these people that have died because of this place were people that were told they could never return. And that is the most tragic thing of it all, is there is no responsibility on their part. They have no caring for it. And when this person died, it's like they had these tribute t-shirts from people that had passed away. And none of the names of the people that died after they left there were on these t-shirts. None of them. Because they don't care because of how they passed away. It wasn't a righteous death in their eyes or something like that. They weren't Christian, or they'd gone back into drugs or something. And it hurts because
I can't imagine how difficult it must be to be surrounded by so many losses so consecutively, so quickly, especially when you're all battling with these life controlling issues that the program suggests it can help you fix. But if there are people that are involved in this program who are losing their lives to overdosing, that suggests that there is a problem at the core of the program itself that is not helping somebody overcome their problems with addiction. And you mentioned in your initial emails to me that you did lose a friend within this program, and that's what caused you to finally kind of dwindle down your contact with the program and eventually fizzle out from it altogether. And I'm wondering if that friend is somebody who you've just mentioned in the last 5 minutes or so.
That's the friend that took their life, and I'm going to say his name because it needs to be said, because it needs to be remembered. Matthew McClendon, he took his life because of this program refusing to let him back in. The person I mentioned before him, Keith Yarborough, overdosed on heroin, and I fully blame this program for that because they didn't give either of them help. There's also Chris Canyon, who hung himself because of this place. This program, it's destroyed people. It's cost people their lives, and it's still operating without impunity, without any legal recourse. And the worst thing is that the man that founded this place, I know he probably had it in his best intentions, but he's destroyed people, and he doesn't see the damage that he's done or that his staff has done. I've lost so many friends to this place, and it's insanity what this place has done to me mentally and emotionally, what it's costed the lives of many people I know. It's those people I mentioned need to be remembered, and there needs to be something done, some kind of justice for them, because this place, they have their blood on their hands. They do. Whether or not most people want to see it that way, they do. They have some kind of complicity with this. Whether it was actually giving us proper treatment to get off of drugs and alcohol, giving us actual therapy with a therapist, talking with a psychologist, putting on some medications that could help us. Yeah. They didn't want to do this because they wanted to cut corners and save money so it could go into their pockets and pay for their dinners and their beach houses in Florida that they own. This program, like many other programs that you've talked about on your podcast, they need to be shut down. There needs to be something done because they're not helping people. They're killing people. There is more suicides and overdoses coming out of programs like these and a higher return rate to prison than anything else that I could think of. It's a revolving door. This is all this is. People leave, they come back. People leave, they come back because they keep going back out and getting hooked because there is no actual treatment. There's no therapy. And you just leave more damaged and broken than the way you came in.
And almost more dependent on the program itself because it's the only place that appears to offer you a sanctuary of some type, whether that's sanctuary from access to these narcotics and alcohol or life controlling issues, or sanctuary in terms of housing and food and accommodation. It appears to offer those things, but at what cost is the overall question, I think. And it sounds absolutely tragic, the effect that this program seems to be having on people that you've met firsthand, that you've known personally, that you've been close to, and yourself as well, the effect that it's had on you. You said that it's affected you psychologically for, permanently, but also there's the physical attributes to your health that you mentioned from the labor that you carried out whilst you were part of this program as well. And I think, as I said earlier on in the episode, we could talk for hours about this. We've almost been speaking for 3 hours already, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface. But unfortunately, these interviews do have to end at some point. So there are a few questions I wanted to ask you before we wrap up today. And one of those questions is to ask you exactly how and when you left and didn't return, and what your life has been like since you made that decision.
Okay, I left probably after a year and a half of being there as a staff member. One of my friends who was in the program, he had graduated out and he didn't want to stay there anymore. He wanted to move on with his life, and his parents were offering him to move back into their house. And they also offered me to move back in because his mom had told me at some point, so we used to go over there all the time to eat dinner, that, she was adopting me basically into the family, which
okay.
I'll always appreciate, because that friend to me is like a brother now. But I went in, I moved out with him, and shortly after, because I was just tired of working there. I was tired of not making enough money, not being able to live an actual life, seeing what was done to people there. I was sick of it. It was destroying me mentally. I gave up. I got up one morning, was supposed to go run an errand for the founder to pick up some construction material, and I grabbed my stuff, threw it into my vehicle, and I just left. I threw the keys to the office underneath the door with a note saying I quit, and I left. They tried to get me to come back immediately that day. They begged me to come back. They kept calling my cell phone for hours on end, and after that, I lived with that friend for about a month or two. Had to move out of there. Things weren't going too well. And with everything that happened at Better Way and everything that was going on, now I was back on the streets again. I ended up checking into a hospital, and I went in for stabilization treatment for suicidal thoughts for about 3 weeks. And then after I left, I went to work for a sober living program. And the program I went to work for, I went on as a driver straight up when I came in. They needed a driver. I started working for them, worked for them for a couple of years, left. Basically, moved in with that friend again when he had moved on from his parents' house, lived there for a couple of weeks, went back to work for the old rehab again as a driver, did some intake services for them. Then I left, and because I met my then, what was going to be, or turn out to be my wife, I met her, and I left that, working for rehabs and programs behind, and I'm now married and doing good. So, doing the best I can, trying to get the treatment for all the mental health issues that were caused by that place.
And that's kind of where you are today. You feel like you're still in the same position, like recovering from what you mentioned earlier, being diagnosed with PTSD. Does that mean that you've received professional help with trying to recover from your experiences with the Better Way Ministries?
I've been doing some online survivor group meetings, which are pretty good. Got all that info from that subreddit. Shout out the Troubled Teens Industry Reddit.
r/Troubled Teens. If anybody wants to go and visit, they are active. They are talking. Everybody has experiences across all the programs you can think of. So r/Troubled Teens for anybody that wants to go and speak out about their experiences with other people who have had similar experiences to them.
But besides all that, I'm doing pretty well. I mean, there's days where I can't go into a grocery store and be surrounded by a bunch of people because my anxiety and my PTSD kicks in, and I'm just always worried that I'll run into somebody from the program, whether it be a staff member or one of their moving vans or something along those lines. I'm always concerned about running into somebody from that place because I'm scared of running into them because of what damage was caused to me by them. I don't like really going out in public because of that. I try to stay inside now.
Do you feel like that may be something that is universal across other members that have been shunned or that have left this movement as well?
I wouldn't say it's universal. I know plenty of people that have completely moved on. They're living a normal life now. They don't even think about that place anymore. Their lives are great. They're married. They have great jobs and all that. They're living completely fine. I think it's a percentage of people left there with some damage, but it's not as visible unless you came in there already with mental health issues.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess my last question to you before we wrap up today, Dustin, is to just ask you what advice you have for other people who may be in a similar situation and looking to leave their high controlling group and kind of start this journey that you're on of recovery and self-identification and moving away from these coercive controls that they may have been subjected to at some point.
The only advice that I can honestly give is don't be afraid to walk away. They may tell you that, when you leave here, you're going to have nothing. But in reality, you most likely came into that place with nothing. So what they're willing to offer you if you stay there isn't worth the damage that can be done to you. If you need to leave, then leave. Because if you don't, it's going to be too late. And you don't want to deal with the trauma of hearing that one of your best friends is dead or that your friend has taken their life. It's not worth the pain. The damage these places cause is more than what they say they actually heal. They intend to hurt people, in my opinion. They're not good for anybody. And if you're thinking about sending a family member to a place like this or Teen Challenge or those wilderness therapy programs, just don't. Get them actual help from actual doctors and programs. There's 12-step programs. There's many anonymous groups you can go to for help. You have to take them to a hospital. Don't take them to places like this. There's people that die every day because of programs like this.
Yeah.
The troubled teen industry it's dangerous. And it needs to be shut down, just completely shut down. It's not doing any good for anybody.
At least regulated, because from the research that I've done and the people I've spoken to, it's not even regulated in any way whatsoever. And that's why I made such a point at the beginning of talking about accredited staff members, because there just doesn't seem to be any or a need for any or a legal requirement for any across these programs, at least in certain states in America and some places across the world. So hopefully we can get the message out there through having these discussions and bringing these topics to light. And you're just one voice of many that's given the opportunity for people to do that and to get these things out in the open, to bring light to these programs that do exist and use these coercive methods of control and create these mental ill situations with people. So I think all there is left for me to do now, Dustin, is to just say a massive thank you for coming on the show, for sharing your story with me, for giving me almost 3 hours of your time to go through and discuss, just the tip of the iceberg of your experience, but also an experience that highlights the problems within the troubled teen industry and things that do need to change. Because as we mentioned earlier on in the episode, this program started in 2006. You became a staff member in 2016, and we're only now in 2021. So it's a relatively young program, and one that just seems to be expanding more and more and more very, very quickly. And there seems to be no regulation with this program whatsoever. So hopefully, if anything, our interview today can bring some solace to other members who have been in these types of programs to realize that they're not on their own, but also to hopefully continue the journey on some kind of legal reform for these programs across America and the world, and to ignite some change somewhere that definitely needs to happen. So I'm just so appreciative of your time today, Dustin. Thank you so much for coming on the show and for giving me your time and sharing your story.
No problem. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and take care.
All right, you as well. Bye-bye.
So I've hit this. That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch and tell your story, you can email me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.